think he's talking to something else. I did this thing right here, which is like an introduction. I did a project for Phantasy Star Online 2, like a little intro project. I was learning how to do this due to Azelria. Back in the day when PSO2 was Japan only, we all had like this kind of like we all congregated on the ship too. It was really cool. Roleplay server and a little music video maker server. So we all kind of like helped each other make stuff for music videos and stuff like that. This is one of them I did. Unfinished, by the way. No, flash faded title. And then I have this. I only had one scene done with it. So you can kind of get an idea. So I was putting placeholders. This is very smart to do. It's almost like storyboarding or script writing for what you want to appear in a specific scene. And what I was doing is I was putting little title cards for what I wanted to show. So I had like intro credits before title. I wanted it to follow the music. That little glitch effect right there was so hard to do. He's green screened. There was a green screen in game. You could actually have a green screen in game, but there was at one point where I actually had to mask all of this by hand, frame by frame, because I couldn't use the green screen for too long due to the fact that his walking animation moved out of it. So it assisted, but a lot of this was masked manually. That's a real song. That's this song. Let's play that so you can hear the whole thing. It's a really good song. I could play it because I don't think it's gonna mark. If it does, well, rip. It's a good song. That was really fun. Real makes music that's like just straight up anime openings. Like all of her music, even though like some of them aren't even in anything. Like she makes music for like intros to things or escalated tracks. Really love her music. So I used it for a lot of stuff. A lot of those animation things. And knowing how to like compose a scene like that is very important, especially when it comes to not just animation alone, but just storyboarding and comics. You want to be able to know how to set up something, like set like a theme and an emotion. So like this right here was like OG Ventus, like Bleach Shinigami from the olden age Ventus, drawn with pen tool, without a tablet, no tablet. mouse only. Line art and color, just mouse. And that was pain. But I was able to learn how to like pan things and like set things in a scene, and it was fun. And I just dabbled with this. I just had fun. There was no absolute like reason I was creating these things. It was just fun for me. That's one thing that people always like stress out. Even I do. I've been going through it. I mean, my community and friends can all tell you is that when it comes to creating, eventually you kind of forget to have fun with it. You forget that like I'm doing this because this is neat. There's no reason I'm doing this. I just do it, just because you can, because it's fun, and you will develop new skills by doing so. With this, I was like, man, I know a lot of scenes that like to like show an environment and then show like a panning character as if he's in a battle. Like this would have been fully animated. Had I went fully through with it, you would have had like his hair actually flowing and maybe attacks going by, and maybe that energy would have been moving or something. But this was just a place card for an idea that I had. Where is he fighting? Where are these pillars? It was pretty much like Quaco Mundo. It was basically a Bleach scene, but with my OC. It's okay to do that. This is all to develop, just have fun and develop your skill. So not only was I making little animations or animatics, RPG Maker games, and learning how to set scenes and compositions and map out areas, because that's what RPG Maker did for me. RPG Maker allowed me to like create. It's like, oh hey, I can envision and explore an area in my head, and RPG Maker allowed me to create that map and actually see it and play in it and explore in it. And then that gave me the ability to be able to construct scenes and ideas in my head on a more inserted level. Like, how would I feel if I was the character in the scene? Because I was able to visualize it with RPG Maker. I was able to see that and construct it on a lot easier level because I know how it's done, in a map view. So I take that and I learn lighting and I learn values and composition in terms of like how a light would appear through a window, which you would see in that. Let's go back to that RPG Maker video right here. Click the link. All right. So right here, I have this parallaxed light coming into the window. I'm like, how do I illustrate that from a top-down view? I have no idea how I'm going to do it. I can't put down an object into the scene because that'll obviously cause problems. You'll be bumping into it and stuff like that. And, that allowed me to learn parallaxing and layering and having composition set based on the foreground, midground, and background. And that taught me, oh, hey, like there are things that are set a specific way on specific layers to set this scene and this emotion. All those skills added up, just because I was having fun with it and wasn't making it a job allowed me to get the skills that I need now and use those skills that I have now to create what I want to create. Though it's a comic series that I want to create, which now I'm having to learn a new skill. I'm having to learn how to layer things instead of an animation storyboard format. I'm having to learn how to panel things so that it flows right in stories, which is why I have, Ragnarok Online mangas, so I can see and have reference panels and ideas. Like, look at that. Like, this is neat shit. Let me pull this up really quick. Yeah, like, look at that. I'm learning just by, intaking and consuming more and more art. I explained at the beginning of the stream that, Ragnarok Online is a big inspiration for my stories. So, I got it because I knew Ragnarok and the lore behind it was going to really help me develop what I want to develop. And if it's in comic format, what better way? Because now I can illustrate things a lot easier by having reference. It's good. You want to have reference for all of your works. It's there's not an artist alive besides like Junji Ito and a select few that can just draw without reference. It's very hard. You can draw without reference, but the thing that you want to produce tends not to come out because the translation from the mind to the hand is very spotty. Your hand is slow and it can't keep up with the information that you want to provide on the paper half the time. So you have to like translate what you want your mind to show on the paper much differently. Because now you're having to actually feel the layout of where things are going to go and construct how in simple shapes is the thing that I want to visualize going to be formed. That's why you have to think in shapes in 3D. When you're drawing, don't think about lines on paper. Think about the object in simplified form that it is made up of. If it's a ball, you know to keep the construction lines or at least a type of shading to make it rounder. You learn that in values. You learn how values affect 2D objects, because if you wanted a 3D ball, when you do a construction of it, you just draw a normal circle and then you do curved and arcing construction lines. You know, shading is just those construction lines on a more advanced level. You learn how to, with values and with learning composition, with learning how to set certain layers and scenes, how to essentially shape that object into 3D with those values, with those skills that you've learned, without having to really think about it. It becomes second nature. And you know, though I don't have a lot of pieces that show that, but my one piece specifically itself does, which I will show. Negikun arts on my card profile. And pull this up. This is my website. So let's go to my art station here. So, okay. So you learn, and I've learned this recently. Here, we'll go back to this one right here, actually. This is where I started learning this. This is where I started really taking what I knew from years before. And now, mind you, it was spotty because I had spent a good 5-6 years not doing that anymore. Like, I think I had a fall off of creativity for a good couple years. So you can tell there would be a loss. But I still remembered subconsciously. I remembered that, you know, having things close and blurry to the camera can give a sense of depth. I learned that lighting on a specific side of a body will reflect shadow on the other side. You learn these things by looking at your environment and looking at how things are composed, and you know, dabbling with certain mediums to easier see how the world around you is constructed on a simple basis. Because when you look at something on your table, for example, and you're like, oh wow, you know, there's a cube there with a little stick in it. This is my, you know, my vape pen. Oh, it's a cylinder, and it's got a little cylinder or oval thing on top. You don't think about that when you don't know values and know your fundamentals. You don't look at an object and go, simple shape. You have to wire your brain to think that way. Because the way we think in symbols, we think in icons, in small, simple forms. When we think of a cat, what's popping in your head is that cat, an image of that cat, potentially, if you don't have phasmophobia or asmophobia. There's a disorder where you can't see, have a mind's eye. You can't see what your mind is creating, which I apologize if you have that. It's just, it sucks because you construct things in a very different way, but hey, it is what it is. But if you can visualize things in your mind, you would see things in simple shapes. Nor more or less, you can never really truly visualize, unless you are a very, very, very good daydreamer, like a full moving scene. Not many people can do that. I found out recently, because like when I say to people that I can visualize a whole scene in my head, hear the voices and the music and everything, they think I'm insane. It's like, wow, you must be nuts. It's like, no, I can sit here and zone out, stare at a wall, watch paint dry basically, but be in my own head. Not to the degree like diving into the Matrix or anything like that, but I can insert myself mentally and emotionally into a scene, so it makes it really easy to construct. So I think about like what would I think about it in my own head. What would really scare people? What would seem menacing? Inspirations in my head start popping up, menacing Sephiroth. I think of Sephiroth. I think of the flames and the fire he was standing in, and I visualize that, and I visualize his stance and how dominant he felt. So I look at that and I'm like, that's great. I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that emotion and that feeling that, like, this dude is standing in fire. He is so strong that the fire, it does not burn him. He is a god. He is terrifying. He's menacing, and looking at him strikes this emotion in you. It's like, I have to run. I'm not prepared to face this. And you get that. You start to feel and construct a scene in your head, and your mind is like, well, I can visualize how I would feel if I were in that position, and you start to see it. That's how I visualize things. So when it comes to that, you can see like the embers in front of the face, the blurry objects that are closer, and then you see the light from the flames that are kicking up the cloak, and whatever's burning behind him is like on the ground, and it's just ripping things apart. Basically, the area around him is just getting torn asunder, but he's standing in the center of it, amidst all of that, unaffected, glaring at you. Like, what are you going to do? Half the time, people will stand there staring in fear, unable to move and scared, which is illustrated in the character in the panel idea I had. That's a great way to construct scenes, is to just daydream and insert yourself, if you can, into it. Or even when it comes to writing, write in a way that allows you to feel. You want to write in a way, or illustrate in a way that you think other people would feel if they were the viewer. And it's so hard to step outside of yourself. And that's why I Captivate TV told me this the other day when I asked the question, because he was explaining about how flipping your canvas resets the mind, and what that does. He explained it to me on a more like detailed level, because I always knew flipping the canvas helps. I never knew the basis for why. So apparently, if you flip your canvas, what it's doing to your brain is your brain is getting used to the one position it was in. Your brain is telling you, this is where you put this specific symbol, this object, which is how we think and imagine usually when you tend not to be too much of a daydreamer. When you visualize cat, you see the image of a cat, not the actual cat, typically. You take that ability and you learn how to insert things in a scene in simple forms. And that's exactly what this is. It just takes a little bit of practice to do. It just there's a lot to invest time wise. So I visualize that with Sephiroth. I visualize that with how would the flames be kicking up, and eventually you're able to construct it almost like a scene or a storyboard. It becomes so much easier when you adapt all those mediums. I'm rambling. I apologize. It's my ADHD. It happens. The basis of what I'm trying to get at, amidst all that rambling, is go back to absolute basics. Even if you know that you are a good artist, even if your drawing is amazing, if you lack the ability to show realism in your art, people will always feel disconnected from it. And it's very difficult to step outside of yourself and to be able to flip yourself into somebody else's shoes. That's why that's the basis of the flipping the canvas. It resets your brain to being in somebody else's shoes, essentially. You are no longer the artist when you flip that canvas. That's what that does to you. It steps you outside of yourself so that you could see what other people see, technically. And it works. It's astounding how well it works, and it helps me a lot. I just didn't know why it worked that way. So that's the point I was trying to get to. Yeah, it's really cool. But yeah, that's one of the scenes this is where I first kind of learned and discovered that taking from what I know from when it came to constructing scenes in video games and using the layers and different feelings of emotion, of fear, and how I would feel stepping outside of myself if I was in this position, and what would be menacing about that. I took from inspirations from like Final Fantasy, Sephiroth standing in the fire, Another thing that it bestows fear in people is unfamiliarity. There's a mask. You don't see who it is. You think it's a human. You think it's that there's a person there, but is it a person? This cloak, it's just shrouded in darkness and shadow, and it's flicking with the flames, and it's more shadowy than it is cloth. Is it human? We don't know. Your brain is associating with it like, I don't know what this is, and fear starts to build and build and build, and you get this sense of unease, and it invokes that emotion in you, the fear of the unknown, or the fear of like maybe knowing but being unsure, and now there's fire and there's ash and there's danger involved. It's not just that there's this thing standing there unaffected by the flames. There's the earth around you itself is tearing up, and this thing standing in the center like it's nothing. That's scary. That's terrifying. And though it may not invoke that sense and that emotion in people, it does trigger that part in the brain. It's cool and it sucks you into the scene. You're wondering, you're sitting there as the viewer, looking through the eyes of the character itself. You're there. And that's why you construct scenes like this. So that's why cinema does this. Why you'll see like the flickering blurring of ash coming in front of the camera, but you're seeing the figure. You're seeing through their eyes, so you're able to insert yourself into that scene, into the movie, into the comic, whatever it is, and feel that emotion. And it's so hard to do when you don't go back to your basics, because you can't just construct from the symbols in your head. And I have to tell myself this all the time. You have to have references, even if it's just mental references. That's why everybody says to build up your visual library. Read, pick up a book, pick up a manga, read and turn the pages. There's something different about the endless scroll versus turning a page that it does with your brain. And when it comes to physically turning the page to a manga or on your Kindle or whatever it is, you are in it, basically. It inserts the brain as like, I'm taking an action in the story. And it gives you this feeling like you can get sucked into it easier. You're able to retain information better. When it comes to Twitter and the endless scroll, your brain is expecting, it's already predicting what you're going to see. So you're not really getting sucked into it. You zone out, you drone out. You're not getting any sort of good visual feedback for things. You can endlessly save images of references for years and months on end and never get anywhere. Because you know what's funny? You're not retaining that information. You're right-clicking, you're saving it, and you're putting it away to the subconscious of your mind where you think it is, but it's completely locked away. You're not sitting there with it and taking it in. So when you're drawing as an artist, when you're referencing, you don't want to just have the image there. You want to understand that image. You want to go back to the basics. How is this image constructed? How is this made in simple shapes? And if you think like that on instinct, eventually you're not truly thinking about it. It's almost like a muscle memory. So you're turning the page in your mind. You're grabbing the paper and you're feeling it. And you're looking at all the inks and the details and you're invested, you're inserted. You can do that with your own skills. It just takes time. And it takes learning how to stick to remembering and consistency with your basics and your fundamentals. And that's how you get that visual library. That's how you get art like Junji Ito, where he just knows where if I put this shape here and put this shading here, I can invoke terror. Absolute fear. They just know because they take from their own visual library, from watching horror movies, from being inspired from books they've read, from other artists, and they sit there and instead of looking at it, they ingest it. They consume the art. They go, how is this constructed with the circles and the spheres and the cylinders? What lighting did they use to invoke this specific type of emotion? What did they do to make this scene from its very beginnings and basics? You could look at an art piece and go, that's amazing, but understand nothing about it. When you start to understand it and see it and visualize it, it becomes so much more easier to put it on paper and illustrate it for yourself. So whenever you get, so if you ever feel like you're getting frustrated, like I cannot get this on the paper, and you take a step back and realize I'm thinking in symbols. You gotta broaden that thinking spectrum. You have to be like, okay, I can't get what I want to visualize on paper because I'm trying to construct it from like the final stages. You're not trying to construct it from shapes or 3D objects and values. You're trying to be like, I just know the hair goes here. I know the eye goes here. You're not actually constructing it. You're trying to translate it from your brain to your hand to see what you see in your head, but you can't do that. The brain will not let you do that. You cannot translate from your mind directly to paper. Maybe one day, Elon Musk, maybe one day we will be able to do that. That's fine. But for now, you do what you can, and what evolution and humans have been doing from the very start is constructing in small shapes, objects, and symbols, but in a way that you can deconstruct everything else in the world. So deconstruction is important. Keep your visual library high. Read books. Look at objects, and instead of looking at the objects, study the object in simple shapes and how lighting affects it. If you could do all of that at once, just by memory, just by thinking about it, art's a cakewalk. If you could do fundamentals, you can make anything you want, because now that you know the fundamentals, you know how to twist them and mold them into what you want it to be. If you can have like a more cartoony vibe, because big heads are cute, and small bodies, big heads and small bodies are funny. They're funny to look at. Look like Gumball. They have this cute, soft look to them, but they have really small, childlike or like elf-like or fairy-like bodies, and they're interesting to look at. And those shape differences will invoke different things. And relate to people in certain ways from things they've seen before. If you can relate to it in basic shapes, just as the world is constructed around us, it's just so much easier to see how and why, instead of the I want to do that and I'm just going to copy it and translate it straight to paper from what I'm looking at. You could do that, but you'll never understand how it's happening. That's why people say, don't get stuck on tracing. Learn the shapes first. When you're using reference, don't trace over the reference. Use it next to it, because you're not learning how that model is constructed in a 3D space, how to translate that to 2D. You're just tracing it, and it doesn't work that well. And you can do that. Obviously, I trace a lot when it comes to my own models and my own hand and my own photograph. If I just can't fathom thinking about shapes, and because it's a lot of critical thought, it's a lot of thought process to do that. But if you can do that and you have the tools to assist you by going back to your fundamentals, it'll make it so much easier. Because now you're thinking, okay, this ball is not a circle, it is a sphere. How is a sphere? How is it positioned? Where's the center of that sphere? You can mark it with construction lines. If you really want to mark the center of the sphere, and you can, okay, well, how high is it off the ground? How does light affect that? Oh, if the ball is bouncing and the light's bouncing off of it, there's not going to be a shadow from ambient lighting of it being on the ground. It's going to be from what's behind the ball that light couldn't hit. And then you learn that, you're like, oh, so the shadow would be here. And it's so much easier, because you're thinking, instead of in lines and in color and in sketching, you're thinking in objects and simple shapes, and it just makes making scenes a cakewalk. So, yeah. Learn your fundamentals. Go back to your past and look at what you created in the past. And if you didn't create it, look at the inspirations that you had in the past, because they are what develops your skill. They are what develops your talent and your ability to do specific things. The things that you have ingested in life from childhood to now is what builds skill. It builds experience. It's literally a video game, but IRL. So, I could spend years hammering away at 2x4s doing construction work and get, amazing at crafting things. I could sit here sketching for years on end, not producing anything. as a self-deprecating joke. Or I could go back and do other things. I can dabble into what made me inspired to do the specific task and figure out, how can I translate those skills to paper? How can I convert my ability to see scenes and movies in my head to paper, but in a way that is able to show the composition in that specific moment that I want to draw out. You know, that's how you do it. You just read, consume art, actually look at the art, and deconstruct it in your head. And that's how you develop those skills. That's why we have lessons. That's why we go to Udemy and search on communities like by Scott Harris. So, plug. But no, it's good. Going to art communities like that helps you learn how to deconstruct things. Having structure will help you do it. Learning from YouTube videos is hard. You're looking at how that person does it, but you're not truly understanding how they do it, how they got to that stage. You got to look at from like the basics always. And eventually it'll become second nature and you won't even be thinking about it anymore. So, so that's how you do that. Yep. All right. Well, it's been